Fantastic. So we are going to have a panel discussion now. It's around driving decisions in transformation and mergers with people data. So I think it's a really good example of where people analytics can add business value. So a little bit of context at the start. So transformations and mergers and acquisitions are obviously a critical moment for organizations and can have lasting impact on business performance, culture, and employee engagement. However, we've probably all seen the data from luminaries such as the Harvard Business Review and McKinsey around 70% of large-scale transformation, organizational transformations and M&As failing. So can people data improve the success rate? I guess that's what we're going to discuss a little bit now. So we're going to discuss how people data can be utilized to guide decisions during these periods of significant change, and by doing so, as I said, increase the likelihood of success. Each of the panelists has been involved in organizational transformation and M&A, and we're going to hear a little bit about that and how people data help smooth the path. And we're also going to talk about some guidance for those in the room as well. We're going to probably be talking for around 25 minutes, and I will then go out to people in the audience, see if you've got any questions as well. So, Perry, because you're a veteran, you've been already on a panel once today, so we're going to start with you. Can you provide, again, a brief introduction to you and your organization, as well as an overview of your experience of using people data and analytics to inform transformation and M&A work?
Yeah, sure. And I'm not going to bore you guys with the same introduction I think as some of you guys in the last session. So really, really quick, just for our company, Warner Brothers Discovery. Hope you all enjoy the Barbie movie, which is one of our biggest hit the year, and the shameless plug for our movie coming out this Friday, which is a new Joker movie. So hopefully you're all going to see. A little bit about myself. So I oversee the workforce analytic practice at Warner Brothers Discovery. I also have an intersect with HR tech, specifically Workday, and also HR operation. I am going to go a little bit deeper into the M&A part of this introduction. So I joined the company 8 years ago. So that time it was Warner Brothers. My first year was my honeymoon year. So 2019 or 2018, AT&T decided to buy Time Warner, which is a company doesn't exist anymore. Under Time Warner, we have HBO. Hopefully you guys watched Game of Thrones, all of those dragons. You have Warner Brothers, which is a movie. You have Turner, which is a CNN, the big brand behind it. So all these companies come together, form the Warner Media. Then April 2022, we spin off from AT&T, and we further merge with Discovery. In that 5 to 6 years of period of time, we did a 5 Workday implementation from SAP to Workday, Oracle to Workday, SuccessFactors, like any HR system, you name it, we did that to Workday. And just to illustrate the level of disruption the company went through, we had 4 CEOs in the span of 5 years. So you could imagine, right, the changes at the top. So I think that the way we supported merger and acquisition, I would say just day one readiness. The workforce analytics team were involved in the parlor process. If you guys go to M&A, you know the parlor process was before the deal closed. You had the lawyers in the room. So we were able to have a seat at the table that time and it created a global workforce view on day one to support the organization decisions. That was before all the systems come together. So that's kind of my experience and our people analytics experience in the context of M&As.
Great. Thanks, Perry. 4 CEOs, 5 HRMs. Cool. And we'll dig into that a little bit deeper a bit later. So, Alan, turning to you, you probably can't give us dragons, but a little brief introduction to you and your experience with transformations and M&A.
Absolutely. I can give you indices and ratings, but certainly not as fun as that. So my name is Alan Suzy. I am the head of organizational analytics and people insights at S&P Global. So we're a large global organization. You might know us best from the S&P 500. It's one of our indices. But we also do market intelligence. We do commodity insights data, and our rating service supports a lot of credit issuance around the globe. So for M&A, that's where I'm going to focus my energy. We had a merger in fall of 2020, so not recommended to execute a large merger in the middle of a pandemic. But I can tell you that they can be done over Zoom pretty effectively. And we did that with IHS Markit. So basically a grouping of a number of different organizations over the last 10 years came together from those two orgs. and became about a 35,000 person company. I was fortunate to join about 2 months before the merger was announced, and my work was really around workforce planning or org design. We used some external parties to bring the data together, as Perry was mentioning, but I kind of brought the lens of, well, workforce planning can be the natural connector of how we execute this transformation, because when it's publicly announced, you see millions of dollars of synergies, whether it's revenue synergies or cost synergies. And ultimately, a good workforce planner will see that and say, oh, that's a demand signal. I need to get that done. What's our supply? What's our people? And we were able to execute that with a number of finance partners and people partners effectively.
Great. And we'll be digging in deeper to that example as well. Amit, over to you to introduce yourself and again, your experience, multiple experiences, I think, with transformations and M&A.
Yes, thank you. Those are hard acts to follow, but I'll try. So Amit Chaudhary, I am currently Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer for the People team at BNY. So the way to think about my role is, Dave was talking in the morning about the different leadership structures that exist. I'm on the extreme right, so I lead our people analytics, workforce planning, operations, payroll, governance, and some generalist activity across the globe. Been with BNY for 5 years. Not sure how many of you are familiar with Bank of New York, but it was started 240 years ago by this guy called Alexander Hamilton. So genesis of the banking industry in the US, till a while ago, our address used to be 1 Wall Street. That's not the address anymore, but that's where we were. And as you mentioned, have had a few different experiences in terms of transformation at Bank of New York. We are currently undergoing one, which is transforming our operating model from how we used to operate. So think about it, a 240-year-old bank, and you're now training it to do things differently. So that's quite an interesting experience. But even in my prior company, which was Visa, I helped set up our HR M&A capability. So the reason I mentioned those two is I can, having done both M&A and transformation, I can really say that people analytics and data are a super critical component to ensure that these things go smoothly. And the role that the people analytics team plays in that can vary depending on the outcomes that you're trying to drive. But it is still a critical role because data is a very critical aspect in terms of making sure that your transformation or the integration is successful.
Well, I think even as a Brit, talking to someone who works for an organisation that was set up by a founding father, I think that's pretty impressive. Yeah. Founding fathers, dragons, and indices. That seems like a good combination there. So let's dig into some more specific case study, I think, from each panelist. So probably spend around sort of 3 to 5 minutes, I think, on this. So Alan, starting with you, can you share an example of how the people analytics and workforce planning team at S&P Global has supported the M&A that you talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had, as I said before, announced great amount of synergies and 2 organizations that are coming together that not necessarily duplicate each other, but should work together. And what we did was we brought our data together from the 2 organizations. Luckily, we were under the same HCM system, but we're able to bring it together and start giving that unified view, which as we all know is a really important start to understanding the organization. When deals are being constructed, there are certain expectations or benchmarks or ideas that can drive some of those decisions, and they don't always match. So the context that I'd love to share is, as I said before, there's demands, but there's often macroeconomic factors that come into play, like a pandemic. But if we recall back going out of November 2020 into early 2021, the market started opening up, and then the Great Resignation started to become a thing. And so what we had to do was really manage, well, this isn't a normal M&A. This isn't a normal environment. This certainly isn't a normal change from very low growth or very limited departures to suddenly everybody's leaving and costs change. So what we really tried to do was say, okay, what is our workforce planning principles going to be? Didn't use that terminology with leaders who are coming from 2 orgs. So we just kind of really simplified the view of what's the kind of org you're going to make, right? New leader X. You don't know half the people. You don't know what it's going to totally look like. You're just going off of, hey, this is why we're doing this. What's the makeup? And then we say, where do you want to take this in 3 to 5 years? So you're getting into strategic workforce planning without actually using certain terms. And we knew those demands were certain cost synergies that would absolutely come out. I can't speak specifically to some of them, but you can go read the disclosures, probably on market intelligence if you'd like. But we ultimately worked with them and said, what's the timing? How are we going to execute this work? What are your ultimate aims? And we use the levers that were given to us, whether it is, you have great leadership. How do you want to balance your org shape, your spans? Or, hey, what's your location strategy? Do you need to move people from one place to another? Or in this environment of high departures, how well do we plan or expect attrition to change? Can we lever on that and turn that headwind into a tailwind? So we did a lot of tacking back and forth on what's the right driver to make these decisions, and worked with what we had, right? Which is a pandemic and a crazy amount of hiring patterns. And that ultimately, we built that over time. And then when you get 16 months later and you're ready to execute the deal, you have done a lot of legwork. Everybody's talking about the same things on the same page, whether it's like a 4 Bs, a 6 Bs, or the different ways you approach the right location at the right cost. And now everybody is ready to execute that work. And what we ultimately saw is we limited the amount of people impacted. We maximized our footprint in terms of choosing the right locations. And we did it on a trajectory that was much faster than even the market expected. And ultimately, I think we're one of the 30% that can say we did execute our plan successfully and ahead of schedule, which is always a luxury in a merger environment.
Yeah, very good. And probably the difference when people analytics are involved rather than just finance involved in that sort of exercise.
I could go into that, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we'll probably talk about that a little bit later. So Amit, same to you. Share a case study from one of those that you've been involved in, either M&A or transformation, and what was the role of people, data, and analytics in that journey?
Sure. So I can talk about what we're doing right now at Bank of New York. It's actually quite fascinating because if you think about the transformation we are driving, it's all about people. We're not changing what we do, we're changing how we do it, breaking down silos, streamlining work, empowering our employees, and really thinking about the customer experience. But it's all about the people. It starts with the people and it ends with the people. And so, the role that people analytics ended up playing or is playing in this entire transformation is multifaceted. So there is an aspect of making sure that we're bringing the right data and insights to the leaders as they're making the decisions around what needs to be the structure for the future, how are we going to think about the roles and how we're going to think about the work. But there's also an element of process that the people analytics team is supporting during this transformation. So it starts with just like simple things, which is we have a current organizational structure, there's a future organizational structure. How do you map? How do you go from one to another? Sounds pretty straightforward, pretty simple, but our systems and the entire infrastructure and tech stack is built to support this model, which we are in right now. There is nothing that maps to the future model. So how do you build that without the foundational infrastructure to enable that? So that's a pretty significant role that the people analytics team plays because it takes the input from the leaders and how they're thinking about it and translates it into the data structure and then puts it back to the leaders that, based on what you just said, this is what the org would look like. And then it goes to even finance. It's like, okay, what does it mean from a cost perspective, budgeting perspective? It goes to comms because it's like, okay, who's changing roles and how does that work? So it's a pretty significant process support model that the people analytics team is driving. And then on the other end of the spectrum, or sort of maybe towards the end of this process, is just measuring the outcomes, right? Like there are things that we need to measure as part of this transformation to ensure that it's going as well as it can and it's achieving the goals that we have. So you got to measure the engagement. You have to measure sort of like the efficacy of the transformation. There's a lot of listening tools that have been put in place to make sure we're getting that real-time information, and the people analytics is at the forefront of it. So the way I would describe the role is like it's pretty core to the success of this entire transformation, which is not just like a functional transformation, but it's actually a pretty significant organization-wide transformation.
Very good. And Perry?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, so the people analyst team at Warner Brother, through the two major merger, one is with AT&T, one is with Discovery, I would say I'm going to bring down to a little bit tactical level, because what we were aiming for was, again, day one readiness. So our goal was when these 5-6 companies come together on day one, while the systems start to integrate, because a lot of you have been in the system integration, especially with Workday, right? That doesn't happen overnight. The system implementation is going to take a while. So our goal at that time is that how do we making sure on day one, the new leaders, the new CEOs that bring the new leaders, they have a visibility into a global workforce view that is bring together just like a static data. So it's very simple, top of stack, nothing fancy than that. But the question they try to answer, right, like what's the overall distribution of workforce? Because what they're gonna do right after the merger is rework or design and all of that. So they need that basic data sets for them to make decisions. So questions are very basic when the leaders were asking at that time, like what's the demographic, what's the location, how many countries we're in when all these 5 companies come together. So that's the role we played, and we used, from a tech enablement standpoint, we use the Workday Prism just to bring the data, because we've gone through 5 times. So we actually had the playbook down. So we had like a data gathering workbook, we had a process, we have the metadata. We just like basically send to all of the system owner, have them fill out the data and then come together, which I would say one of the byproduct of that process, if you all go through M&A, is that actually sets some pre-work for the system implementation, because you start to do the harmonization right there when you have the data together, because you have to do some sort of harmonization, mapping all of that, right? Locations, the bonus plans, the job profiles, all of that. So I would say that is the biggest role that we played, is just get that global workforce view ready on day one. And it's basic, but it's foundational. And if you're in the last session, you know that I have no problem to stress how important foundation is, before you can do the fancy stuff.
Oh, very good.
Can I double down on that?
Yep.
It is super critical, the foundational pieces. Sometimes we tend to focus on like for lack of a better term, like the shiny new thing, right? That's out there, and or it looks, a problem statement, it seems very sexy, very sophisticated. Let's go solve that. Foundation is core. If you don't have the foundation, you can't do anything else.
I'll give you a sticker called #data is innocent later. That was what we talked about earlier. Yeah, data quality, integrity, all of those.
I like these stickers. I think it's very good, Perry. We're going to dive on a couple of topics that are obviously critical with transformations and M&As. We're going to look at culture and employee engagement. Going to go into sort of working with leaders and other key stakeholders. Go a little bit more around workforce planning, and then we're going to explore that technology and data topic that you raised there, Perry. And then we're going to go out to the audience as well. So let's start with culture and employee engagement. One of the traditional failure points in transformation is actually around employee engagement and retention. I mean, how do you bake this into your work? Amit, we'll start with you.
Great question. I think there are some metrics that we all are aware of, like which we traditionally all track, like retention and engagement, that we do, right? Those are table stakes, and we measure that. But retention tends to be a bit of a lagging indicator, right? You know about it after the fact. There are some models out there that can be a little bit more predictive around what you expect, but it's still not really helping you drive the change and affect change. So you need to get in front of it a little bit. So what we try to do is listen a lot. Like we have a culture of listening. So we have, sometimes it's over listening. Sometimes you get a little bit of that, survey fatigue from the organization as well. But we do tend to over-rotate about collecting feedback. Our CEO is very big on making sure that we're hearing what folks are saying on the ground, and then we are both receiving and sharing feedback. So that is a very critical aspect, or a very critical tool that we leverage to ensure that we are driving the right outcome from an engagement and change perspective. So as an example, as part of this transformation, we have been constantly asking the folks that are going through the transformation and how it's going, what's working, what's not working. And that has led to a significant amount of feedback on both positive as well as negatives or constructive side to say, like, these are the things that are not working. But it's great because then we have been constantly evolving and addressing those challenges. So making sure that, you're listening, but then you're able to actually make that change and then go back to the organization and say, yeah, we listened and this is the change we're driving, has been super critical to ensure that we have the engagement, and that is translating into retention as well. And then the last piece, I would say, again, this is not any sort of earth-shattering thing for anybody here, but the painting of the vision of the transformational change and making sure that people really understand the driver behind that is super critical. So that's been another thing that we've been heavily focused on.
Right. And Alan, Perry, is there anything you add on the sort of culture engagement topic?
So in our organization, I don't own the employee listening program. However, I think as someone that is downstream benefit from the data, we do have a lack of wanting to do survey because of all the M&As we've gone through. Every time a new CEO coming in, they're like, well, that's not the right time to do the survey. We wait till next year. Then next year come along, the new CEO coming in, that's not the right time. So we actually don't have robust data on like engagement survey. We tend to link insights into exit survey, which isn't the best because now you're too late in terms of getting the information. But that's kind of what we're dealing with right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you said it. The only thing I would add is when we were building our foundations, right, executing, trying to move quickly, benefits was a really big driver because our chief people officer, chief purpose officer really wanted to focus on, well, what do our people think about us as a combined entity, especially if they're coming from, in your situation as well, multiple sub-companies. We needed to really define who we are, what it means to be at S&P Global. And so we leaned in hard on these are our benefits approaches that we've seen over time. Maybe it started in core S&P Global, but these legacy orgs can benefit from it. That was a game changer in terms of cultural assimilation or understanding. And that was a hard piece of work to do, especially kind of in 9 months' time post-merger or integration.
I will anchor off that. So we actually do have, CEO brings new CHRO, right? So we actually do have a new CHRO joined January this year, and she took over the position officially in April. She actually had a huge focus on the culture and the engagement. So while we haven't had a robust data, I would say we are excited about the priority strategy she's going to bring. Hopefully we don't go through another M&A anytime soon, but that is something we super look forward to because the survey information, it gives you insights that you just can't draw from a quantitative data actually out of the system. Yeah.
And Perry, staying with you, so again, thinking now about working with leaders, and obviously you've had, a number of CEOs, so you're probably well placed to answer this. What are some of the things that you measure in relation to M&A and transformations, and how do you drive action by leaders?
That's a tough question because unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to position it, the outcome that we're driving towards is the result of the restructuring, right? Because then they're looking at the data you put in front of them, they're making the people decision. But that said, right, when the companies come together, naturally it's going to lead to restructuring redundancies. So that's one part, something that I think it's important to measure, but it's not something that put the human spin on this, right? It's a tough thing for employees. The other side is that we do use, when we created those day one readiness dashboard for workforce, like a holistic workforce view, we use Workday and we use Workday Prism. So from there, we get these metrics, like how many people run the report. It's very basic. You just see how many people run reports, who are running them, and you combine with the question you're getting from the business. That is kind of our cobbled way together to see, okay, are they using the data? Whatever we put out being used. Because the last thing you want is you put all these effort in, you put something out there, nobody is using it. So that we use that to inform if we are delivering what kind of the business leaders they need.
And anything that either Amit or Alan you'd add to that in terms of what are you measuring, and how does that drive action by leaders?
So I would sort of echo what Mary said, which is it's all about the outcome, right? So the action by leaders has to be in sync with what is the outcome you're trying to drive as part of the transformation. So I'll give you an example. Like I actually helped lead the transformation of the technology organization in my prior company at Visa. And there was a lot of work involved in it, but at the Uber level, there were 4 key tenets of that transformation. One was around insourcing of talent. The other one was around driving the right pyramid. The third was building a campus class. And last but not least was around vendor consolidation. So you built the metrics around those 4 key outcomes. And you said, okay, this is where we are. This is where we want to go. This is the measure. This is the timeline. And it's there for everybody to see, are we driving to the outcome that we agreed that we needed to drive to, or are we off? And if you're off, what are we doing to course correct? And you just sort of build a cadence. It's very repetitive, but it's super critical, which is like every 2 weeks, that same dashboard goes all the way in the organization. So from the lowest level manager to the senior most leader sees their data and sees what they're doing in terms of driving to the outcome that the organization needs.
I think there's a good lesson for any metrics there. Connect them to outcomes that people care about. Yeah. And Amit, staying with you, what are some of the key internal partnerships that you need to really pay attention to when you're undertaking people analytics work to support transformation and M&A work?
It's a great question. I would say all your stakeholders, right? But if I was to pick out a few critical ones, I think the prior sessions have alluded to some of these, like obviously your business partners within the people team are super critical, and making sure that they're engaged, they're aligned, and you are talking, basically from the same hymn sheet to ensure that the business is hearing this exact same thing from you and them is super critical. But then the business is super, super critical. And sometimes the people analytics functions engages directly with the business, right? Especially in M&A. When I was leading M&A, a lot of time I was dealing directly with either the business leader or like the M&A function for the enterprise versus the business partners or anybody else in the HR function. So those are critical. But the third one, which not often is talked about, but in my experience has been super critical in the success of the people analytics function, is finance. Having a strong relationship with finance, your CFO, your FP&A partners, goes a long way in helping drive, again, the outcomes that you need for the organization. Again, if you are connected with your finance team and you're sort of aligned on the objectives for the organization, because there'll always be some, cost objectives and some transformation objectives, but if finance and HR are talking the same tune, it helps tremendously. So those are the 3 that I would call out.
And Alan, I'm going to come to you on that because I know you work very closely with your finance team. Maybe in the context, you could talk about how you working with finance in the support of the workforce planning and all design initiatives that you undertook during the M&A.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was alluding to earlier where I wouldn't couch it in specific workforce planning terms, it was because we were trying to bring finance along for the ride, right? The way they needed to hear how we're going to approach this had to be, one, to answer the previous question, outside in. Right? What are the aims of the merger? What are the aims of the long-term strategy of the organization? So I think about the merger or mergers and acquisitions to be, you announce something, you set terms of what is expected to come out directly via either cost or revenue synergies, and what's the accretive growth of the organization, and how fast you get to that. Because the street is only concerned with, did you do what you said you were going to do, and am I going to see the return on that investment? So everything we did was, well, what is that aim? And finance was our number one partner because they're the one responsible for making sure it happens. So when they're redesigning an org, they're thinking about it in terms of operating expenses, margins, earnings per share, and then I can bring the humanistic side, the design, and that's where we really gelled because we were thinking about a very people-first way of doing it. That's how we couched it at S&P Global, and I think we hear those terms elsewhere. But it was to speed of execution that would reduce culture risk. But then the ultimate goal is now, are we meeting our growth objectives? So the second you finish a merger and it's successful, what's our 5-year plan? Are we meeting those aims? And so we then had to make sure that we're meeting the right margins, we're meeting the right earnings, and we can adjust. And that workforce plan became then the way it was discussed with leaders. So they didn't know they were workforce planning. They just knew that they were meeting their goals at the right pace that they needed to. And if we weren't, we would adjust some of the levers to make it effective. But they were the critical factor, without a doubt, because also, as I think we all know, people data is great, finance data is maybe better, and I would love to bring those together to actually solve the root problem.
Very good. We've got about 5 minutes. Let's open up before I come to you each for a very quick key takeaway at the end. Couple of any questions? Oh, wow, we've got loads of questions. So we'll probably have to do some of the questions at the end. So I'll let you choose first. There's maybe one here, and then you can pass the microphone across. Let's wait. I think you usually have to wait a few seconds for the microphone to be turned on.
Yeah, okay, cool. Question for the three of you, but most directly to Perry because she's been in so many. How much projecting of future organization did you do in anticipation of the mergers that were happening? So because a lot of our leaders want to start planning the future org immediately. As soon as you announce, hey, we're going to combine, they're like, okay, I want to cut this, I want to add that, I want to reorganize all those people. Regardless of whether or not they're supposed to do that, they want to do that immediately. And so how much of that did you have to address in your reporting to help them do that? Or did you just tell them, you got to wait, right? Like, how did you approach that?
Well, the data is available to them on day one, so that's a pretty big hurdle to get through. Because last thing you want is they make people decision without looking at the data at all. But the challenge we have is that when all the companies come together, they don't. It's pear and apples almost. Like you may have a senior manager at Warner Brother or SVP at a Warner Brother in a production environment is equivalent maybe to a director at the corporate function from Turner, for example. So without that being mapped, it's actually quite dangerous for them to make a people decision right off the bat. So what our responsibility, because they're getting pressures from the finance side. Guaranteed, the merger happened, there's a goal. There's like target sets everywhere, right? So our responsibility is making sure they're making these decisions by looking at the data and support our business partner, HR business partner, to really getting into deeper in people's role, like the work, the actual work they're doing. So I do see that as a very important, and the accuracy of the data, because that goes into the whole psychological safety, because every employee is out there, right? They know the leaders are looking at that, and we're corporate function in a way that we can inference that, right? We can set the direction for that. So that's what we're pretty focused on, is just getting the data together as fast as we can, mapped out as fast as we can, and put in front of leaders, not just HR business partner, actually the business leaders that are actually making these decisions.
If I could just add to that, right, I would echo the point around making sure that the data is available. But the question that you asked, like, that needs to be addressed a little bit like on the front end of the process, which is when you're actually thinking about the acquisition, like what's the strategic rationale behind it? So if there is significant synergies that are part of the strategy of that acquisition, then you have to drive to those outcomes. Like and some of that will come from people and headcount. So you have to think about the org, and that has to be part of the process. Other times it could be completely different. It could be an acqui-hire, right? You're acquiring for the talent. And in that case, you would never do that. So it just depends on what the strategic rationale is.
Got time for one more quick question. Arun here at the front.
At what point do you start producing, post-merger, the standard set of reports, analytics, executive reporting that senior management typically looks for? And do you modify any of the history from the merged in organizations to be able to sync up and produce some unified metrics?
I'll take that one. We spent 9 months giving, Cole was here, I don't know if he's here, directionally correct reporting and analytics. It wasn't our best work, but it was kind of, hey, this is what we've got while we're executing the integration of our human capital management systems to deliver on the best and give it in a more federated or democratized sense. And they were used to it, right? So, we're blending data via Prism or whatever other elements before. It went from, 80% to 90%. And they understood what we were working through. But as long as you're working light and loose and you've built that trust over time, you could do it pretty quickly with that directional data.
Yeah, I would say the first merger happened was 2019. I think our first global workforce view dashboard was in place through Workday Prism, and Workday, it's still there. Because every year after that, right, I said that we had a playbook down, you pump the data in, even now all the companies are together, that actually is still live. And then you just have to making sure that the scalability of it, you just have to making sure it's automated process now because it's all coming from Workday. But we did not move away from that dashboard that was put in place. We enhanced it with a lot more data points. I don't know when we're going to move away, but I don't think it's in any foreseeable future. I mean, it works. It's single source of truth. Both finance and HR are using it. So it's kind of like, if it works, let it be so that people don't look for other data points to kind of dilute kind of that single source of truth.
So one sentence from each of you to finish. If you had to give a tip to anyone in the room that's about to embark on a transformation or a merger and acquisition, what would it be? I'll go along the lines. I'll start with you, Amit.
Sure. One thing I would say is do not underestimate the criticality of change management in any M&A, any transformation.
I would say have your data analytic person have a seat at the table when those discussions happen so they can get ahead of those data requirements and what's needed for day one.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Fantastic.
There you go.
Alan, Perry, Emmett, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.